today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the convention that we were just at. And so it's going to be a little bit different from what we normally do. It's going to be a little bit more laid back. And kind of our purpose is to show you a little bit of, well, you know, this is something that Swift did. It was cool. We have pictures. Just real quick poll. Who went in the room? Okay. Well, it was awesome meeting a lot of you. And I definitely made some new friends at the con and got to know some other people a lot better. So that was enjoyable. I hope that those of you who went had fun. And if there's anything that you see while we're presenting that you're like, oh, you know, I went to that and thought this about it, that's fine. Go ahead and sort of interject. Or if you saw a talk that was really cool and you want to say 30 seconds about it, you're free to do that as well. So to start off with, I'm going to talk a little bit. So for those of you who did not go with us, we went to Scale, which is the Southern California Linux Expo. It was at the Hilton down at LAX. The other Hilton, if you're mad. And so basically it's a convention of about, I think there was, the official numbers was 2,300 people. Was that?
It felt like more though.
Yeah, it felt like a lot more. But there's about 2,300 people who showed up, and so there was an expo floor with vendors like Facebook, Migo, Riot,
Arch,
Gentoo, Linux, Ubuntu, a bunch of different
IBM.
really big name companies, some really small name companies. So that was cool.
There were like 140 of them that were there, by the way.
Yeah, there was 140 different booths or companies.
I pulled that number out of my hat, by the way. But it was somewhere around.
Okay, yeah, it was awesome. We got a lot of swag, t-shirts. We got some stuff for the members raffle. That's exciting. No, you guys don't have to be excited for that. It's okay. And then there's talks. So there was a bunch of talks on technical subjects, on introduction subjects. They had a Linux intro. I know that Brian went to that. Was that pretty cool? Did you learn a lot?
Definitely learned a lot.
So there's a lot there for all levels. And one of the things that we covered, really briefly, I forgot to do announcements. So we're still taking membership if you're interested. It is $10 a quarter. So, and it's prorated, so per quarter you get to drop off $10. Also, this Friday is ALSYS, which is the Advanced System Linux Administration Seminar. Hopefully more of you will want to come after Scale and maybe after today. It starts at 6. It's in this room. Bring your laptop. We'll be going over sort of hands-on techniques on how to do some basic system administration. So it should be a lot of fun. Also, Iron, for those of you who remember him speaking 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, something like that, will be continuing his talk with a more technical description of Linux security. So, yeah, and slides this time, hopefully. So, that should be good. Also, for anyone who is interested, there is an etiquette dinner that UBSS is having, that's the United Business Student Senate, which is our council that Swift is under, and they're having an etiquette dinner. So it's basically you get to go up to the Kellogg Ranch Hotel and have a meal there, and they go over some basic etiquette rules. It's kind of fun. It sounds stuffy, but it's really not. You dress up a little bit. It's excellent food. Honestly, that's why I go, is because it's a cheap meal at the Kellogg West Hotel.
How much is it?
It is $25, which is better than $40 for dinner there. The catch is that the money is due today. It was a miscommunication, and so if you're interested, then we need to get the money to Rainbows. It doesn't look like she's here, so you can go ahead and talk to me, and we can get you a ticket stub. So that's it for announcements. We can do the next slide. Okay, so how to pick a Linux distribution is what I wanted to cover really fast. So, okay, I am interested in Linux. You've convinced me that Windows is perhaps not everything that I thought it was. How can I get started? Well, you should pick a Linux distribution. how hard could that be, you ask? There's just Ubuntu, right? There actually is a lot of different distributions, and you guys have heard me rant about this several times.
And Zach, you're getting out of my frame.
Oh,
Scoot that way. Thank you.
I gotta get back into the video apparently for posterity. So I've clearly spent way too much time thinking about which Linux distribution I should use. It is unfortunately a passion of mine to sort of change distros every couple of months, which is not good. But it has enabled me to look at a bunch of different distributions, and so hopefully I can shed some light on. So how many distributions are there anyway? There is a lot. I can't emphasize how many distributions of Linux there are. This is an incredibly tiny sampling of the logos. So up there, there's some big ones: Ubuntu, SUSE, Fedora, Knoppix, Red Hat, Solaris, Gentoo, FreeBSD, Debian, Slacks. You guys have probably heard about a lot of those as we've been talking about them. So, next slide. This is, I've shown you guys this picture before. It's a very brief and tiny, low-resolution picture of the history of Linux, starting from Unix and filtering down to all the primary distributions today. This can be found on Wikipedia, I believe. I don't remember where I got it. But this is just up to 2001. So then a more complete picture is actually on the next slide. Can we click on the last link? Yeah. Can you zoom out? Control minus, maybe? Yeah, there we go. So if you were to take a very brief glance at this, this is the number of distributions that are currently forked. So some big ones, there's Debian. You can see all the branches. The big branch right there in the middle is Ubuntu. That one is the Ubuntu thread. Also on here is Slackware. Arch is up there, I think. This is also on Wikipedia. Only because they have great images and not because it's an incredibly easy to access resource. This gives you a scale of how many Linux distributions there are. So there is an almost infinite number of distributions, and there's always more coming out because someone decides that the other 4 million just aren't good enough. So, go back. So there's 2 links on here, which we can throw up on the website. They are Linux distribution choosers. I played around with them really briefly. Basically, it's like, you know, okay, pick, do you want a desktop, do you want a server, you know, what kind of things are you interested in, and then, you know, okay, are you a power user, are you brand new to Linux, those kinds of things, and it'll filter down until eventually you have a few distributions to choose from. I don't know what the full list is, so I don't know how good those are because I've always chosen a distribution through other means. I thought I'd throw them in there though. So next one.
Hit distro watch.
Distro watch is a good one too. Basically, it's got a list of all the distributions. It's huge, and it has links. Correct? Links to all the.
Well, I'm not sure about that because filters based on different parameters.
Right. Okay, so now we're sort of going off the beaten path of my slides, and I'm just really fast going to blaze through what are some of the major distributions, why I like them, why I don't like them, and hopefully you can get some information, because really the only way that you're going to figure out whether or not you like a distribution is to sit down and install it and play with it for a while. And if you hate it, then switch to a different distribution. If you don't hate it, then use it until, you know, right, until you hate it and then switch. Right. So my history starts with Debian. So when I first came to Swift, and had never used Linux before, the first distribution I ever got my hands on was actually at a CCDC practice, doing IP tables with Debian. So Debian is a fairly stable operating system. You guys have heard me talk about Debian a lot. So I have a confession, which is after Scale, I came back and I reevaluated some of my opinions. You guys have heard me talk about, you know, Ubuntu and Debian a lot, and how I feel about those. And in the interest of full disclosure, I would like to say that some of my opinions have changed, because some of the distributions that I've used are not as good or as bad as we make them out to be. So, Debian is a pretty good distribution. It is one of the older stable distributions. So most of the packages on there are, were built a year or two ago. It's still a really good operating system. Basically, if you're looking for something to start off with, if you're looking for something to run a server on, Debian is fantastic. Normally I show pictures of the different distributions, but the distributions there's a separation of there's what it looks like, and then there's the underlying operations that are performed on it. So Linux has, the core, it has the kernel and the modules and all of the things that are running the low-level sort of backbone tasks in the system, and then it also has the front-end GUI interface, right? So a lot of people, when they think of Linux, they think of just a command line terminal, but most Linux does not do that anymore. Most Linux comes with a GUI of some kind. So there are multiple kinds of GUIs. There's KDE, LXFCE. I think I threw just a bunch of letters together there. Thank you. That's one of them. GNOME, Awesome, Cinnamon.
DWM.
Yeah.
DWM.
So Xmonad. So those are all graphical front ends that you can install. So it's kind of pointless to show you what a distribution looks like because you can compile any of those graphical interfaces and run it on there. So more when it comes to picking a distro, if you care what it looks like, then you can get any of the distributions generally to install with your preferred desktop environment or Windows Manager. I like KDE. A lot of people really like GNOME. A lot of people really don't like KDE. A lot of people like those other ones that no one cares about. I know, I'm just kidding. So basically, when you're looking at a system, you should choose based on the backbone. Do you like how the system is set up? If you are unaware of how the system runs generally, then you're in a really great spot because you're not going to care which distribution you pick, right? Ubuntu's good, Debian's good, probably not Gentoo. There's different difficulty levels, right? So Debian is easy, it's older, it's very stable, it's got some weird things. To be perfectly honest, I recently installed Debian and was actually rather displeased from a user point of view. They don't have a package for Firefox. They have Iceweasel, which doesn't run some of the plugins of Firefox. There's some interesting choices that.
The reasoning behind that is because it's running on a 3.5.2. It's an aging version of Firefox.
I get it.
Yeah.
I understand all the things about Iceweasel. It's just there's.
If you update to the latest Iceweasel, like I'm running 18, it'll run the plugins.
I couldn't get it to run.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
Well, don't worry, neither can I.
So the point is that there's some interesting choices made by the devs. That's going to be true for any distribution, which brings me to my next point. Next slide. Is Ubuntu. Oh, hey look, the Debian logo. The purpose for this is, this is a joke, because Ubuntu is forked from Debian, and when it comes down to it, they're really not all that different in some ways. Ubuntu is much more mainstream. Basically, anyone who's ever heard of Linux has heard of Ubuntu. You guys have heard me joke a lot about how much I disliked Ubuntu, and most of the time that was a joke. I don't know if everyone understood that. Sometimes, though, after using Debian for the first time, I decided to install Ubuntu. I installed Ubuntu and used it for about 3 months, and after 3 months, I was really angry at Ubuntu because of some choices that they had made. They switched over to a graphical interface that I didn't like. They made some other changes to the user interface, some backbone system changes that I didn't like. It all comes down to preference. So whenever I say this distribution is bad, that's not because it's actually bad, that's because I didn't like it very much. And after seeing all the things at scale that they talked about with Ubuntu, it's not as bad as I said. So I would like to officially retract my statements on Ubuntu until further evaluation. So please feel free to install Ubuntu. Because for the basic user, even for more power users, it's not going to be any different from most distributions that use apt-get, that use systemd, that kind of stuff.
You also
So-
get purchase suggestions right there in your little search box.
I would like to mention that if you go with Unity in the default Ubuntu install, they have recently implemented, this is the only actually bad thing I can say about Ubuntu, is that Canonical, the nonprofit that sort of runs and controls Ubuntu, has started inserting Amazon buy suggestions into your search box.
The truth.
And they don't seem to be particularly concerned about this. They're like, because people were in an uproar, and they're like, why is everyone mad at me? You're inserting Amazon buy suggestions into my desktop. Why wouldn't I be mad at you? So that's the only bad thing. But other than that, Ubuntu is definitely not as bad. So now for a really quick tour. Oh, right, one more. So the other thing is that I was trying to correlate all the different distributions of Arch to different lolcats, and it turns out that just doesn't work very well. However, one that matches really well is Arch's Grumpy Cat. So Arch is a distribution that Swift has used for a long time. There are a bunch of Swift users that are still running Arch. It actually was a really good distribution for a long time. Recently, they made some changes to it that made it less user-friendly, less straightforwards. They broke a bunch of crap. And then, so it was either, okay, you can spend hours and hours going through your system, fixing these config files that the script didn't automatically configure, or you could reinstall, but that's a different process now, or you could switch to something that isn't constantly janked with by the developers. So, Arch has been kind of a grumpy cat recently. It's not a bad distribution. It's much harder to use, but the wiki is fantastic. So if you run the scripts on the wiki, because that's what they are. I mean, it's you copy and paste commands, but it's basically a script. It's like manual script running. It's kind of interesting. So let's do a really brief tour of some other distributions. So Red Hat, it is enterprise Linux. What does that mean? Basically, it is still open source software, but they want you to pay for support. What does that mean? So, if you want to run products, professional products, business products, engineering products on Linux, you want to run Red Hat. And they will give you service. So it's actually fairly expensive to get a year of service. It's like $300
That's not expensive.
Yeah, that's not.
For example, if you wanted to license Oracle,
Okay, we don't want to talk about Oracle. No,
no, in the world of licensing things, they're
Sure. I just meant as far as if you're looking at using it as, like,
yeah.
because it's twice as much as, well, not anymore, but it used to be twice as much.
I think
as
they
it
have
is.
student discounts and stuff too.
Okay. I haven't really explored that too much because I don't need support generally. Also, the other thing they do is they don't actually provide you the ISOs to install. All the software is available and free online, but they don't compile it into a distribution for you because that's support, apparently. So you can't get the ISOs through their website. There are other ways to get them, but generally, Red Hat, I really like Red Hat. I used it at work. It's a good distribution. There are spin-offs of Red Hat. Yeah, CentOS, Fedora are both branches of those that are free and open source, and you can get the ISOs online, and they're basically designed for personal users instead of business users. So those would be great ones to start with because what happens is all of this support, all of the bug patches flow down or sometimes flow up from the open source software. So there's two models that get used a lot. Basically one is that either software comes from the business and gets from the business model and gets spun back into the open source, which is great. It comes out basically 6 months or maybe a few weeks, depending on the release cycle, past the enterprise systems. Or what they do is they use the open source version as a test bed before they spin it into the main trunk of the enterprise Linux. So Red Hat does this. The other company that does this is Funsized. I don't actually know how you're supposed to say it. I think it's OpenSUSE. That's how they say it at the booth. But that may or may not be because they've said it so many times they're tired of saying the E. Not OpenSUSE, sorry, SUSE, or SUSE, is the enterprise version, and then OpenSUSE is the free and open source user distribution. So I'm actually incredibly impressed with OpenSUSE. Really briefly, the reason for that is because you can design your own live disk on what they call SUSE Studio. And so it's a graphical front end on the web where you literally go on and you build your own distro. You're like, I want KDE and I want LibreOffice and I want Firefox, and you put all these things on, and it helps you through the selection process. And then you build it, and it spins it up, and it gives you an ISO that's custom to you, and you can install it right away. So you don't have to worry about, oh, I'm going to get packages on there that I don't want, or, you know, I'm installing, and the only thing it has on there is Nautilus, and I hate using Nautilus. So it's pretty cool. And then on top of it, they have a thing called Test Drive, where you actually spin up a virtual machine on their servers of your distribution, and you can play around in it to make sure it works properly. So SUSE Studio is really awesome. I'm actually going to try it just for funsies. So those are the enterprise versions. We already talked about Debian and Ubuntu. Those are sort of the two of the more main stream distributions. And then the last couple of ones that I want to talk about would be Gentoo and Arch also, because Arch is not a bad distribution. They've just gone a direction that I don't like anymore. So again, as a personal opinion, Gentoo is essentially, it is kind of hard mode. It is not how you should generally start with Linux, because it's difficult. They do have a really, really good documentation manual for how to install Gentoo. But it's a lengthy process. It's not just like popping an ISO in and there's not an install script necessarily. There's many more steps to the process. The cool part about Gentoo is what it actually allows you to do is compile all of the code on your machine for your particular architecture and processor with specific build flags. Build flags are basically things that when you're compiling, say I want you to do it this way, I want you to include these features. And so that allows you to get a performance boost. It's not a huge performance boost, like 4%?
I don't even consider it any.
Okay, there's not a huge performance boost, but it's a lot more flexible. And I've heard some people say that they get a lot of good things out of Gentoo. I personally haven't used Gentoo a lot, but once it's up and running, it's not horribly different from other distributions of Linux, other than you have to compile everything, so it takes a little bit of time. But we saw Gentoo running on the Chromebook Pixel in high resolutions, and it actually looked really awesome. They were running, who saw that with me? Do you remember what front end they were running? Was it KDE or no? Cinnamon? Something like that.
No, it was, I think it was no, but it was me.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it was me. But they also, the backends of the Chromebooks are Gentoo, the ones that are sold by Google.
Right. So that was pretty cool. To see that, I mean, it looked really, really nice. It was actually one of the most beautiful looking distributions of Linux I've ever seen. So you can do a lot with Gentoo, but it's definitely hard. So if you're thinking about trying to install Gentoo, talk to somebody in Pound Swift, because probably Swiss really likes Gentoo, and it's definitely Zero's favorite distribution too. So that is a really, really brief overview of Linux distributions. So hopefully that wasn't too uninteresting. If you have questions about, how do I do this, how do I find other distributions, feel free to ask. But really, just go to DistroWatch, do some research, and then install a distro because it's a trial and error process. And honestly, start with Ubuntu because there's nothing wrong with Ubuntu. And if you go through the same process as myself, where you use it for 3 months and then you end up hating life and switch to Arch, then you will know exactly why you don't like Ubuntu, and that's a really good experience. So now we're going to quickly have, which you guys wants to go first? We're going to have some guys come up and talk about stuff that they saw at Scale that they found interesting. So we'll have Grizzles go first.
Cool. All right. Yeah, I'm just going to talk about a couple of the talks that I went to that I thought were pretty interesting. So the people who went to Scale, how many went to the buffer bloat talk? Okay, so like a lot of people. Cool. All right. So I went to this talk called like, what is buffer bloat or something, and they talked about lag on the internet, and I was like, I don't know what that is. It sounds interesting. And so it was cool. So he basically started the talk with a really interesting demo. The guy, he pulls up his computer, he's got a projector, and he starts downloading some huge file. It takes like 3 minutes to download or something. And he said, okay, so while this file is downloading, I'm going to go ahead and run a test bench and try and open up a web browser and go to Google. And he does it 5 times, opens up his web browser, and it takes like, maybe 5 seconds, 5-7 seconds for Google to come up. And I don't know about everyone else in the audience, but I'm thinking, okay, well, that's obvious because he's downloading some huge file in the background, right? And so then he goes, okay, so he closes his web browser and he goes onto his router and he enables rate limiting, which means that he's actually, he constricts the throughput on his router, makes it so less traffic can go through there in a given amount of time. And then, he goes back, he's still downloading this huge file, and so then he goes and opens up the web browser, and it comes up in like 1 second. And he does that 5 times, just as a test bench, and it comes up significantly faster. And so it kind of blows your mind, like, how did, by restricting the throughput on his router, did he make this go so much faster? It doesn't make any sense. And so the reason for that was something called buffer bloat. And so the main point of this talk was that large buffers kind of kick us in the ass in a way. And so there's lots of different buffers that your computer has. Like your Ethernet driver has a buffer on it, or your Ethernet card has a buffer on it, your operating system has a buffer, or some router that you might be going through probably has a buffer on it. And so what buffers do is when you're downloading traffic from the internet, it all flows into some kind of buffer or holding cell, and then when your computer's ready to accept that information, it pulls it from the buffer. And common thinking has always been, the larger the buffer, the better, because then I can just download everything at once and then pull it from the buffer. But the cool thing about the talk was that he demonstrated this idea of buffer bloat using like 2-liter bottles and funnels and all this like water work. And he poured water down some things, and it was really interesting. I don't have that stuff here, so I'm just gonna draw a picture. All right, so like you have your computer down here, and the buffer was like this big, like open 2-liter bottle, and it had like a funnel on it. Okay, and so what he would do, and so this is like the buffer that would be holding all your traffic, and you're downloading stuff from the internet into here. And so the problem with having a large buffer is when he was downloading this huge file, it just fills up the buffer with all sorts of with all that data. And so then when he goes and tries to open up a web browser and visit Google, that stuff gets put on top of the buffer. So now you have to wait for all this data from that file you're downloading to get through before that other request gets seen. So the problem is when you're trying to do more than one thing at once. And so by having a smaller buffer, this data would be able to go through faster, and then it can service your other requests.
The other thing was that
the TCP?
you end up dropping new stuff rather than old stuff. And that too.
Right. So another thing you mentioned is that TCP relies on packet loss for it to work. The way the TCP protocol is it sends data back and forth at a certain speed, and it gets faster and faster and faster and faster until it starts noticing that you're dropping packets, and then it drops the speed back down again. So that way it tries and keeps it as fast as possible. So the model for TCP basically relies on packet loss. So like I just mentioned, part of the problem with this is that when this buffer's full, and then you try to get a new request in, it just starts dropping the data right off the top from your new request rather than anything old. He went over different kinds of buffer models that would help alleviate this buffer bloat effect. One of them was like a model that had like a spout basically at the bottom, and so once it started noticing that like the buffer was full and you'd be dropping packets, it would actually start dropping packets from the bottom, which would be the oldest traffic instead of your new traffic. But yeah, so basically what he did with his router when he did the rate limiting and restricted the throughput was that his router is basically like another funnel. It's another, because like I said, there's lots of different buffers that you have to go through before you actually see the data. And so this basically like another funnel. So this data is going into here and filling this up. And so by making his router buffer smaller, it would drop traffic, and the TCP model would work better since it kind of relies on that packet loss. And once it starts seeing that packet loss, then it knows to slow down. Yeah, so that was really interesting, I thought.
The best part is that that's something that should have been working this whole time, but because of this, it hasn't. You should be able to have lots of TCP connections going fairly, but nope.
Because we have huge buffers,
Yeah.
that it just kind of destroys that model. He said something super funny one time, like he knew a network administrator that was like, oh, I'm going to build my network so I never drop a packet ever or
Yeah.
something. He's like, that's cool, so you're just going to destroy the whole model of TCP by doing that. So that was interesting. I don't know, are these talks going to be available on microscale probably
Yes.
at some point? So yeah, you'll probably be able to check it out online. Yeah, waterworks and all. It was actually pretty cool to see him do the water. He had different food coloring and stuff. Anyway, and then there was one other talk I wanted to touch on I thought was pretty cool. It was practical application troubleshooting with strace. And for those of you who don't know what strace is, it's a command you use in Linux to trace system calls of a process. And a system call is basically something, it's a call made from your operating system to the kernel to go do something. And you know, the kernel is what interfaces between the hardware of your computer and your operating system. So, and for all these different, the reason all these different distributions that we're talking about, like Fedora and Ubuntu, whatever we call Linux, is because they use the Linux kernel. Anyway, so strace, you would use it to debug an application to find out what's going on if you think it calls to the kernel. Or actually was using it like the day before Scales, which was helping me debug a TFTP server that wasn't working. I'd started up and it didn't start, and I was like, what's going wrong? So we used strace and we found out what was the matter with it. But anyway, so the talk itself was really interesting. He talked about how to use strace on processes to help find solutions to applications problems. But one thing that I thought was really interesting that I just want to mention, he demonstrated how you can use strace on a SSH server to basically get people's usernames and passwords, which I thought was, kind of surprising. I didn't know you could do that. Everybody kind of, regales SSH as this unbreakable ultimate encrypted protocol, which, I mean, in today's time, it sort of is. It's, it's really strong. But, so if you have a computer that's running an SSH server, SSH, for those of you who don't know what that is, basically lets someone log in to the computer. You'll have a computer, it's running SSH, you have like a bunch of different users that need to log in. They type in a username and password, and that's how they connect to the computer and administer it. Sometimes, like how we have on our CalPolixO server, you have more than one person that has root access to the server because it's not maintained by just one person. It's probably not the best model. I don't know, but so you have different people that are able to maintain the server. And also, in Linux, your usernames, or not your usernames, but your passwords are stored in a file in a hashed format. They're encrypted. So even if you have root access to a machine, you can't just log onto the machine and find the passwords for all the users that are on there. That would not be cool at all. So when someone logs in, it's, even though you have root access to the machine, you don't know what their password is to their username. But you show that using strace on an SSH, on the SSH daemon, the server that's running, you can actually see and intercept system calls from the operating system to the kernel that have their password in clear text, which was kind of shocking to me. I guess that makes sense, sort of. I don't know. That was really interesting. If you've never used strace and you want to know more about Linux and the kernel and how your applications work, you can check it out. It's pretty, it's got a pretty lengthy, verbose output that you'll be like, whoa, when you first see it. But I mean, it's cool to check it out, especially if something's not working right on your computer. But yeah, that was about all I wanted to touch on that strace talk. Zero, Justin, do you guys want to talk about something?
I have a question.
Oh yeah, you guys have any questions? Sure.
Did he say it or mention anything about he would use RSA encryption connection? Like he said, after you've got a file with a long string of characters.
Oh, if you use a certificate?
Yeah.
Well, you're not using a password for that, so it's not like you'd be able to see a password for that.
No, you can't.
Would you see it as a certificate? No, because you don't actually send.
No, you don't send it. You do it. That's like a challenge response thing. That's
right. So no, that's actually would be a.
That's why I don't use a password on Calc.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a good point. That's actually a more secure way to do it because you don't send your private key, so there's nothing for the. The operating system doesn't send that to the kernel or anything, so that would actually circumvent that problem using certificates instead of passwords. Were there any other questions? Cool. Zero? Justin, no? You guys? No.
One of the talks that I think most people will be interested in was the advanced bash one. But it's not up yet, and I don't remember much from it, but when I was sitting through it, yeah. I pretty much recognize most of what he's talking about from a PDF I got from this site, programmingmotherfucker.com. And they have an advanced bash scripting guide in PDF, so if you don't want to wait for the video to come out about that talk, you can go to this website and grab that. But the most interesting thing I saw at Scale was at the Mozilla booth that they had. They were showing off their phone OS, or their mobile OS. They had it running on an N7 and a prototype Android phone. And I thought it was pretty interesting. It's entirely web-based, written in HTML5 and JavaScript. The apps are written in HTML5 and JavaScript. And in order to keep them secure, they're going to do their approval process just like they do with the extensions in Firefox. But if you want to write your own apps, you can and easily just load them in. And when I was talking to the guy, he said that their price point is around $50. They're mainly shooting for, I guess, emerging third world markets like Brazil, India, stuff like that, Eastern Europe. So yeah, there'll be mainly GSM phones. I thought it was pretty interesting. It's pretty fun to play with.
It's currently out for some systems.
Yes, and if you have like a Galaxy Nexus or maybe an M4, you can install it. Joe has it installed on his laptop in a VM or something.
Actually,
so you can play with it.
through Firefox, there's an extension that gives you a virtual Firefox OS of it, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, so if you want to play with it, you just download that extension. And
But not if you're running Iceweasel.
don't give up on that move. Install a real OS. Yeah, but other than that, going around the booths was also fun. They had a lot of free stuff. I think one of the funniest ones was boxer briefs that said maximum uptime on them. Yeah, and then if you talk to Swiss or Alejandro, they grab something like a couple of hundred stickers walking around. There was also a Riot booth if anybody plays League of Legends. And they had what are they? Skin codes. So yeah, I grabbed a couple of those to raffle off in a couple of weeks when we do the raffle.
Oh, word. I'm going for that.
You paid your dues?
I'll pay my fucking dues yesterday. But it's just as expensive. It's $20, right?
Yeah.
It's on 30?
Yeah, they get you this quarter and next quarter.
Yeah, but if he only gives away one skin's like worth $10. Yes, shit.
It gets you
All right, guys,
eligibility
that's it for us. So hopefully that was entertning and interesting. And if you want to learn more, hop on the Scale website, hop on the Debbie site or the Alessi site. They'll have wikis. And see you next week or Friday if you're coming to Alsys.